All right. Good morning, Netroots Nation, and welcome to day 2 of this virtual conference. My name is Reyma McCoy McDeid, and I have the privilege of both serving on the Netroots Nation Foundation Board of Directors and moderating this incredibly timely panel, which is titled Disaster Strategies So White: How a Lack of Inclusivity Harms Recovery Efforts. This session has brought together some of the leaders in intersectional disaster recovery services. I'm going to leave it to them to introduce themselves, beginning with Allilsa Fernandez.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Allilsa Fernandez, and my pronouns are she, he, they, preferably interchangeably, which means mixing it up. I am a Latinx, brown skin person. I'm wearing brown glasses, polka dot blue shirt, white background, short black hair, and I have a kitty pillow in the background with pearls. I sit in the board of Nichols in the Anti-Task Race Force. Anti-Racism Task Force, wow. And Diversity Committee. And in recent months, because of COVID, I've done a lot of mutual aid work and disaster work. Thanks.
Thank you, Allilsa. Germán and Shaylin, you are up next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shaylin Sluzalis.
My name is Germán, Parodi.
And we are the co-executive directors of the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, which is one of the, is the only United States-based disability-led organization focused solely on people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters.
Again, he, him, and
she, her, she.
I have my skin is brown. I have my hair pulled back. I have a black dress shirt. We have a.
And I am having short brown hair with a yellow t-shirt and light skin. And our background is tapestry that's colorful with blue circles and flowers.
Thank you, both of you. And last but most certainly not least, Anita Cameron.
Hi, I'm Anita. My pronouns are she, her. I'm like a kind of dark, medium dark skin, black man with long dreadlocks. I have the full bag. Have a teal and purple shirt on, and my background, my wall. I am director of minority outreach for Not Dead Yet, but I have a background in disaster and emergency preparedness going back to 2004. I have served as a CERT, which is a community emergency response team member in Washington, D.C., Rochester, New York, and but for the longest part in Denver, Colorado. I teach CERT and I design CERT programs. And I've recruited well over 30 people with disabilities to serve as CERTs in Denver. I've written on disaster preparedness for the state of Colorado and for other entities, and yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Anita. And I apologize, I will do my due diligence as far as offering my pronouns and my own description. So my pronouns are she and her, and I am a light complected Black woman. I am approximately the complexion of a Nilla wafer. And I have long, very large, curly, natural brown hair, and I'm wearing rainbow colored glasses. And my background is two multicolored pictures, one of which says, "No one on earth can do what you do precisely the way that you do it." So we are, if you haven't noticed, we've begun our panel probably a little bit differently from how you are used to seeing panels begin. We've done image descriptions, we've identified what our pronouns are, and I also want to note that we should be having closed captioning. The fine folks at Netroots Nations are working on that right now. There was a bit of a glitch, and so we do apologize for that. But our intent is to make in addition to our conversation being intersectional and inclusive, the rollout of this panel being intersectional and inclusive as well. And so, as a society, this conversation really couldn't come at a better time. We're in the grips of a pandemic, as we all know, that's being very poorly managed at the governmental level. And so nonprofit organizations, mutual aid initiatives, and other grassroots type arrangements are really being stretched to the maximum in the US right now, as far as disaster recovery efforts are concerned. We in Iowa, I'm located in Iowa, are feeling that more than we've probably ever felt it in recent history, because we were literally ripped in half on Monday by a weather pattern called a derecho that most of us had probably never heard of prior to Monday. For those of you who don't know, a derecho is basically a hurricane that occurs inland. And so we got a taste of what our friends in places like Puerto Rico and coastal states experience with hurricanes. Currently, right as we speak, in Iowa, more than 250,000 of us remain without power. I personally did not have power until last night. And in total, 10 million of acres of crops have either been damaged or destroyed as a result of Monday's severe weather. And you might not live in Iowa, but ultimately if you eat food, then you too will be impacted by what happened in Iowa. There have been photographs that have been taken from outer space of Iowa, and the destruction of crops can be seen from outer space. So it's certainly something that impacts us all. Now, that said, Iowa's largely a white state, but the derecho offered us a sobering glimpse into the harrowing experience of our fellow Americans who are impacted by natural disasters, again in places like Puerto Rico, Louisiana, and other regions of the US that, because of the demographics of those who bear the brunt of these storms, largely go ignored by government at every level, along with national media. So what occurred in Iowa this week, too, has largely been ignored by folks outside the state, and it's left us Iowans perplexed, hurt, and frustrated. So my message to my fellow Iowans is this, however: welcome to the club. Ultimately, though, the why behind the lack of coverage of Iowa's derecho is very different than the why behind the lack of attention brought to those impacted by natural disasters who are multiply marginalized, including Black, Indigenous, other people of color, or BIPOC, and or disabled people in particular. And so that's what we're here to discuss today. And without further ado, let's talk. I'm gonna bounce some questions to our panelists, and then later in the session, we will open it up for questions from the audience. If you have questions and you are listening along, please feel free to throw those into the Q&A. And then keep the chat section just if you're experiencing technical issues, or if you like an article of clothing that one of us is wearing and you just want to let us know, that just throw that in the chat. Let's reserve the Q&A section for the actual questions, just to assist us in ensuring that your question is seen and, time permitting, responded to accordingly. So this first question is going to be for both Anita and Germán. Who are some of the historic key players in disaster recovery who have been overlooked because of
This is
race?
really frustrating. Like, totally frustrating.
I'm sorry, Anita, if you are having technical issues, can you go ahead and mute your microphone and throw that into the chat so that we can get Netroots staff to assist? Thank you so much. Germán, who are some of the historic key players in disaster recovery that have been overlooked because of race, ethnicity, and/or disability?
This is Germán. Thank you, Reyma. So I'm a quadriplegic. I acquired my injury when I was 17 years old in Puerto Rico. And I lived a life living through disasters, living through hurricanes, being on the ready for that. Not on the planning side as we do now, not on the response now. In 2017, Shaylin and I, along a team, were deployed to Puerto Rico, passing Maria. And when after 3 weeks, and in other parts of the questions, we'll delve into that experience. But coming back, I was told that I learned I was the first person with a severe, air quotes, disability to be deployed into a major disaster. I didn't feel any different. But then I couldn't look at examples. But then I thought, I have Anita. I have friends in Chile who work with Inclusiva, who last year were doing, during the rising issues with the politics last year in Chile. This is a man with none of his limbs, going out in his wheelchair with bullets flying by him to take food to other people with disabilities that couldn't go out and do it. So being in Puerto Rico and seeing the work, we collaborated with a lot of the people on the grounds. The response is local. Who are the unnamed heroes? The local people that go out and help. When I was in my young teenage years, after I remember oftentimes during the summer storms, going out with the community members and clearing out the gutters when they got flooded so the water could keep going. In PR, after Maria, it was the areas that first cleared out were by community brigades, if you will. Around the world, disasters and first responders is the local community. And no one talks about that. The involvement that we will speak a little bit more later. We were deployed to Bahamas after Dorian. And it's with the collaboration of the local guide. And I don't mean a guide. I mean by the guide of the locals. We come in to perhaps advise, support, empower in any way we can. But it is, again, the examples that need to be looked at, that are not studied, that are not mentioned, that are not consulted, are people at the impacted areas. Reyma, you spoke about what's going on in Iowa, and it personally bothers me that so little is being talked about, and yet it is all over the news. The fires in California. The issues of multiply marginalized communities goes deep in socioeconomic levels too. What happened after a church got on fire? $1 billion. We will speak, and you explained a little bit of what's going on in the United States, what's going on around the Caribbean, Latin American, what is called the Global South. When we hear that the United States is buying 90% of one of the world's needed therapies, that means that the rest of the world is dealing with 10%. we have to look at the locals and learn from the examples they create.
Thank you, Germán. That you raised some fantastic points. And in your introduction, you mentioned that Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies is literally the only organization of its kind. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the partnership is and why you and Shaylin felt the need to bring the organization into existence?
In 2016, following the catastrophes that truly are still not dealt with to the individual levels following Harvey, and later in the following year, Irma and Maria, Paul Timmons with Poor Light Strategies and Marcy Roth, who used to lead FEMA, came together along the community with members of NICO also, and decided the government is not responding to the stakeholders that are most affected, and there needed to be a body to galvanize the need and the conversation, to realize that housing, transportation, socioeconomic need, wages, healthcare, all of it, every cross-sectorial segment that you can have issues with in a disaster are exponentially worse. And in 2017, we met Paul Timmons while Shaylin and I, along many adapters, another great advocacy group that fights for the rights of people with disabilities, over 25, 30 years. We were outside of the Russell building camping out, and we met Paul Timmons, who came in support. We were camping out against the repeal and replace policies of 2017 on the ACA.
One of our many campouts.
One of our many campouts. There, we met Paul. September came and Maria impacted my home as a catastrophe that the Caribbean had never seen in many, many years. I mean, this is new to the size and the level. And we got the call to be deployed anyway. It was the first time. I mean, the directive was find people with disabilities and older folks and help them any way you can. We also met with FEMA locally and the local disability-led organizations at the table, that not only while we were deployed, but that afterwards there could be a members that work together with the government and disability-led organizations. That works. We have lived a life of fighting against the institutionalization of people with disabilities, against their will, truly, into facilities across the board, and not to mention what is going on in the prison system right now with COVID, and recognizing right now, including mental disabilities, everyone in a congregate setting has to be having tremendous fear. I could not fathom it. We realized the world is not paying attention to disasters, not our side of the world. That we clearly learned that people with disabilities and older people in a disaster will die, will be injured. And I mean, while we were deployed, my own aunt survived the storm. While she was cleaning, fell and dislocated both of her shoulders. And because of her age, she couldn't get them popped back into place for 3 or 4 months later until an orthopedic surgeon could pop them back into place. And when she fell, her 94-year-old mother, trying to help her up, broke her wrist. These are injuries that happen afterwards. Our life's goal has become to help people with disabilities in disasters. No one's focusing on it. You hear of the Red Cross, Samaritan Purse, all the major disaster responders, and they say they have some directive for people with disabilities, but they don't have any way of finding them. They don't have the protocols. They haven't cared. That's where we come in. We assist remotely with empowering disability-led organizations to do the work locally, as I was explaining initially. When they asked us to come in, as in they did in when we were deploying in the Bahamas, we first contacted local disability-led organizations, 242 Disability. They put us in touch with their Ministry of Health, who then invited us as the government. And at every step of the way during 3 deployments, a total of over 2 months, we had someone from the Bahamas, not to say a local person, I mean, someone from the Bahamas. When we're meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister, we have local people with us that never had a chance to meet with a such official, so they can continue to work locally afterwards. And now they are preparing for work because hurricane season's here. Now, in 2019, in September, the founder executive of the partnership, Marcy Roth, is now the executive director of the World Institute on Disability, which we collaborate strongly with. And Shaylin and I have become the co-executive directors of the partnership. And since then, we'll speak more. Essentially, our main mission is on empowering communities, the growth of resilience of a full community. Today, it needs to be said, BIPOC, people with disabilities, indigenous communities, women, youth, we need to get to a place where it's community resilience and we recognize that it is a full community and we don't need to say adjectives anymore. I'll close with, we do a lot of work with the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Office. I'm the focal point for persons with disabilities across the Americas. We're doing, sorry, our dogs are wanting to contribute. We do a lot of work with the Organization of the Americas, Pan American Health Organization, and many more in educating right now the need to understand people with disabilities in congregate settings are dying. We need the supports in the community. And the way to do that is to get funds into the hands and the pockets of organizations and people that are serving people with disabilities directly. I think I've taken longer than I should.
No, thank you, Germán. What you said was very necessary. When we talk disaster recovery, you're right, we don't think about the most multiply marginalized people, and people who are living in congregate settings are being forgotten. We've all seen the harrowing stories about individuals who are in congregate settings all over the world who have been basically abandoned during the pandemic this year. And so this is a very timely conversation, to say the least. And I just, for the sake of ensuring that we're all on the same page as far as some of the organizations that we have brought up and will bring up during our hour together, if you're not familiar, ADAPT is probably the preeminent advocacy organization or conglomerations of advocacy organizations throughout the country that focus on giving voice to the US's largest marginalized community, those of us who are disabled. If you're not familiar, ADAPT is the reason why we still have the Affordable Care Act in this country. ADAPT saved the Affordable Care Act for all of us a few years ago. And if you remember the images of disabled people at state capitals and in DC being arrested en masse by the police, that was because they were advocating for all of us to save Obamacare. So just putting that out there. NCLE, National Council on Independent Living, also a national level organization that does advocacy and policy work with regards to disabled people. And several of us are on the NCLE board of directors, including Germán, Allilsa, and myself. So Anita, oh, and also we've got thank you, Shaylin, and also Jennifer, who's an attendee, have put links for both the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies and ADAPT into the chat. So if you want more information about both of those organizations, please feel free to click on those links. They are in the chat right now. Anita is probably one of the most preeminent advocates in the disability community, and has done amazing work for well over 30 plus years. She's been doing this work since before the Americans with Disabilities Act existed. And so, Anita, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are with regards to historic key players in disaster recovery who have been overlooked because of race, ethnicity, and/or disability.
Hi, this is Anita. Well, I tend to think along the line of what Germán did, those people who are in the community, you know, doing things. There's so many of us who have disabilities who've done local work in our communities, but we haven't really been recognized. I did my longest work in Denver for Denver CERT, and the thing that I noticed was first off, I was the first disabled person to join Denver CERT. And it was interesting because when I went through training, when you go through training, and CERT training is governed by FEMA, so it's pretty much uniform across the country. And when you finish a CERT class, your graduation is an exercise. And it's a pretty realistic exercise. And for my graduation exercise in Denver, was not accessible to me. And so I had to tell them about themselves. And I remember the director half jokingly thought that I had set her up, which I didn't. It's just, hey, this is my graduation exercise. I have to participate actively in this exercise in order to graduate. And here is, I'm the only disabled person in the class, and I can't even participate. So we did, I was able to participate. Oddly enough, I was the blind person taking notes. And then afterward, I recruited other disabled people. But then I noticed in my community, the folks, well, the Black folks, which unfortunately was me, we weren't afforded the same level of prestige, if you will, that others got. So it was kind of a struggle. It wasn't so much of a struggle for disabled, because those folks that I brought in, we taught them how to think outside the box when it comes to different disaster strategies like search and rescue and communications, and all of that. But what I noticed was that the white folks and the guys were getting all the plumb assignments and everything, And the folks of color, you know, we were given lots of responsibility and even some leadership roles, but we came for advancement. We got stepped over, and it was either the guys or the white folks who advanced. And so, you know, one of the folks I recruited, 84 years old lady who's blind, indigenous, and, you know, she was one of our heroes, you know, on our, you know, team. She was our oldest recruit. You know, and so I don't have like out and out names of people, just we have whole groups of people who, you know, those unsung people, you know, of color. I worked with the Muslim Society, and you know, those folks. I was called on duty numerous times, but I never saw anyone else of color called up. I got lucky, but all those people serving their communities, you know, they're the ones, the folks from the Latinx community in Denver who became CERTs and who concentrated in those communities, you know, the folks from the American Muslim Society, you know, who took the class. I helped to teach that class, you know, and who were in their own communities, you know, doing the work. I served on the Denver Commission for People with Disabilities and was able to bring disaster awareness, all of that to the city, really get the city involved and stuff, you know, but we had people, you know, working, you know, for that, you know, disabled people. I think the unsung heroes that I ran into were either disabled, who did what needed to be done, who during the floods in Colorado, a team of radio operators were called up. I was part of that team. I am an amateur radio operator. Our entire team of 6 comms people were all disabled. And we assisted the state FEMA and Red Cross and other organizations in dealing with the shelters and routing some of the in rescue and, you know, preparing routes, you know, because a lot of the places were the roads were washed out and whatnot because of the floods. You know, we provided that. That was our team of disabled people. Same when we had fires. Same when we did our national medical disaster systems, exercises and whatnot. All those folks in that, you know, we were all disabled. And we served, you know, we served our communities, and that's the thing that I try to keep making sure that gets out. We have the right to be rescued and dealt with before, during, after disasters. But those of us who can, we want to serve our communities as well as be served. We want to be at the table. We want to be on the committees and commissions. We want to be out there getting our communities, together. When I was in Denver, I went throughout my neighborhood, and gathered up folks. And, we have storms in Denver, we have disasters. When the fires happened, they got so close, smoke and whatnot was going. And so we just kind of set up a whole neighborhood crew that, hey, anything goes down in our neighborhood, we're here, And so I think a lot of folks, a lot of those heroes, those unsung heroes, they may not necessarily have names that I know to put out there, but they're the folks, especially the folks of color, and particularly the Black folks, who don't get recognized. It's funny, and not funny in a good way. Wherever I've done and been, it's, always those of us mostly marginalized, we don't get the credit that we should get.
Yeah.
So there are tons of unsung heroes out there, and most of us not in that recognition, like, 'cause we are not only disabled and not only Black, women, we're, so Black disabled women, there's me and a couple of others,
Yeah.
We never got our due. And those other folks, those CERT folks, this is it's a white thing. I'm sorry, it really is. I mean, disaster preparedness, disaster emergency, and all, I met a few years ago, maybe 1, 2 Black folks in intermediate positions in FEMA or whatnot, but disaster is still so white. And when the help comes, a lot of times it goes to the white areas first. And, the Black and brown areas, we kind of left out. We kind of have to fend for ourselves, and we have to fight that much harder, for representation, and to get those leadership positions when we are doing work in neighborhoods. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Anita. And this is Reyma speaking. What you said really brings us to our next question. By and large, the efforts of multiply marginalized people who have engaged in disaster recovery have been ignored for a lot of reasons, and we could have extensive conversations about how systemic racism and ableism have mitigated that. But the unsung heroes element of disaster recovery has really been crucial as far as ensuring that multiply marginalized people are served as well as possible. And so we have with us one such unsung hero, Allilsa Fernandez, who has really done incredible work in a short period of time to ensure that our conversations around disaster recovery, especially around the pandemic, are also inclusive of intersectional considerations pertaining to mental health and mental illness. And so, Allilsa, with regards to that, can you talk to us a little bit? And I want to be mindful of time. We actually only have 10 minutes left. So keeping that in mind, how have multiply marginalized people worked to get their needs met as best as we can in the absence of access to reliable disaster supports from entities like FEMA and other governmental type entities?
Hey everyone. So a lot of the disasters work for multi-marginalized people have been done for decades, centuries, the same exact way. we have never and continue to not rely on the government because disasters is so white. We've seen that with Hurricane Harvey. A lot of the aids went to white predominant neighborhoods, and poor neighborhoods. I mean, the pictures just came out. People were up to here with water up to their necks. They were drowning. Homes were completely gone. The rebuilds in poor neighborhood was so disastrous that the president was called out at that time because not even FEMA was providing. So we as marginalized people, disabled, Black, people of color, Indigenous, we LGBTQIA, queer, transgender, we had to rely on ourselves, count on ourselves, come together ourselves to uplift each other. People have families in South Carolina, other New York, New Jersey, all these other states, and those families were sending the contributions. And how can we get them on the plane to get them away from the disaster? And we are seeing that now, the same thing that happened in Sandy. I mean, Hurricane Maria, how it's part of the United States, but complete disregard. FEMA was sent in as a last minute thing, rather than we need to amp up and respond. Because again, disaster is so white. So we've also always responded together as a culture, as a community. It's been rooted in us. We're not going to be saved by the government, and we're not going to be saved by white people. So we save each other. We have a saying in our Black and brown communities that says, we keep ourselves safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so true. So now we're starting to see that with COVID, and we have continuously seen that through COVID. That housing has been an issue. We have, according to the ACLU, 1.4 million people across the US are expected to be evicted. Out of those numbers, the highest proportion are Black and brown folks. But still no aids or enough aid to address that problem. In some states, we're already starting to see high evictions. New York State, we have seen a lot of protests, and we continue to have the courts remain closed so those evictions don't take place. But how many Black and brown folks are going to face eviction? So to summarize that, we continue to keep ourselves safe. We continue to provide for each other. We continue to uplift each other. And until we place intentionally the most marginalized and multi-marginalized people in leadership position of disasters, we're not going to see that change. Because we're seeing people, white people, take up on mutual aids now. If you look at these groups, is white leaders, even though the concept was created by enslaved Black people who became free. This was back in the 1800s. They built this concept, like we need to support each other. But you see, current mutual aids don't even pay respect to that. And furthermore, they're continuing what we've seen in the system in mutual aid. So we're not thinking about intersectionality in respects to disability. So a lot of the work is, if someone's blind, good luck to you getting food. If you have allergies, good luck to you getting food. I know of blind people personally whose food were delivered, and they were like, I don't even know what's in the box because they don't have description. They don't have holes in them or certain stickers to identify them that they can feel. The work that's being done even in mutual aid doesn't consider intersectionality. So to finish off, until we see the most marginalized and multi-marginalized people lead in the table because they know what their community needs, we're not going to see changes. And for funding to be intentionally put into the hands of the most marginalized people, I think that's when we'll start to see that shift.
Thank you, Allilsa. wonderful insight that you've provided for all of us. We have a fantastic question from the audience, and it is, how do we move the needle? What steps can stakeholders, people who want to affect change as far as the subject matter is concerned, what steps can they take to ensure that disaster supports shift towards intersectionality? And this is a question that anybody can answer, but Shaylin, we haven't had an opportunity to hear from you, so why don't we pass the mic on to you?
This is Shaylin, and thank you. And I will keep my comments brief and short and let my friends and colleagues elaborate more. But I would first say, as everybody else has said already today, include us, include people with disabilities, include multi-marginalized communities from the start, from the beginning and throughout. And as everybody else has mentioned, having that representation throughout each and every process, throughout the planning, throughout the response, and that means the direct relief response, as Germán was saying, being the first and only so far person with disability to do the disaster relief response directly, or being noticed as so. And because there are, as we have said already, there are so many unnamed heroes that do this work, and we are doing this work. We've been doing this work for so many years, and time again, people with disabilities, multi-marginalized communities are left behind. People with disabilities are 2 to 4 times more likely to die or be injured in a disaster. And we also see that the systematic barriers that we face each and every day as communities are exacerbated by disasters, and that is what leaves us left behind. That's where the lack of access to resources, as everybody else has mentioned here, comes from, and ensuring that we are at those tables from the very beginning, throughout the process, through the end, make sure that our voices are heard and that the needs are met and that resources are being allocated to the places that need them most.
Just brief, this is what briefly add, and seeing most of the audience being women. The political is personal. Yeah. We mentioned institutionalization, and you may hear institutional bias. And there are different definitions for this that are clear. But with the concept of the political is personal, in our lives, the Social Security Act, specifically its Title 18, creates the bias where there is an entitlement to the institution. That's where every law afterwards is being created with that as a foundation. That is, if the law says that people with disabilities should be there, that must be a safe place. While these laws were in place, you could go and research what Pennhurst was, and these laws were in place. So we gotta break the laws at the beginning, and we hope that soon we'll have a new administration to affect these changes. And we cannot create more patches. We need to recreate the system. And lastly, if you have the opportunity, if you are to the audience, if you're at a table of any sort discussing anything that creates change, take a homework. Look for someone that is multi-marginalized, that is BIPOC, that is disabled. You're just one person. And maybe they are not encouraged to do so. Take it upon yourself. Be a kind of, AA sponsor and bring them in to the fold. Because the more people we have talking about this, the more people we can save and change lives.
Thank you, Germán and Shaylin. And we are actually nearly out of time, so we're gonna let Germán's comments be the last for our panel. I want to thank everybody who joined us this morning for Disaster Strategy So White. This is, again, a very necessary conversation. I want to add September 30th is a hugely important date if this is a subject matter is something that you're passionate about. Do what you can to support the people in your community to fill out their census, because census determines how federal funding distributes itself throughout the country. And do what you can to ensure that as many multiply marginalized people are filling out their census information as possible. September 30th is the deadline for the census, so please prioritize that in the midst of everything else that you're thinking about right now. I want to thank everybody again. Have a wonderful day. I added some information if you are interested in participating in the other offerings at Netroots Nation this year that are specific to the disability community. Tonight we've got a CRIP camp screening from 7 to 9 p.m. And then tomorrow we've got a panel of wonderful disabled women coming together to have conversation about being disabled women in the nonprofit sector. That's from noon to 12:50. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your Netroots Nation conference.